also think that the legislative change, the big P changes, that's never the end. I mean, oftentimes with little P policy changes, it's lasting and impactful and sustainable. Whereas if you pass an ordinance at city council, that's never the end. Because as soon as you do that, you've created a shift in the landscape and everything's gonna be different. And so the network is the only thing that sustains the work, because the ordinance, the policy, it's never the end point. It just never is. And so that network is the only thing that has any potential of sustaining that, you know, what you were trying to achieve past the policy, because it's like the earth just shifts and everything moves. Once the policy's in place, then your network has to be prepared to support the outcomes from the policy that you wanted to get.
Because they can fall apart really fast if people are used to, don't move my cheese, you know, if people are used to doing things one way and there's nothing to support the change, and they'll be just like, whatever, we're not,
Yeah. And I think to that point about food banks, sure, just any, whatever the, often, we see that too, food access is a huge issue. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but setting the priority, having a focus and knowing what that focus is, helped us do our work much faster, but it also meant that some folks were less involved. And so being transparent about setting priorities, being able to share how you came to those priorities and why, but also being clear that priorities are only priorities for a certain amount of time. And then there's going to be a new landscape and a new priority. And so authentic relationship keeps people involved, even when their work is more tangential. It's never not important. We have a good friend in the work in North Carolina who says, if it builds relationship, do it. Which I think is a great just life motto, but I think in this work it also feels really true. So I think it's time for dinner. Is dinner here, John?
No, it's not here yet. It's running late.
Okay.
I got a text. Waiting.
Great. So I wonder if people have questions. Should we just take a break? I can also keep going.
Well, we can wait. You guys, so the restrooms, just real quick, are up the stairs through the door, the glass doors. Yep. And then on the left-hand side of the hallway. Look at that. You know, we could probably, what do y'all think? We can keep going until dinner comes. She was supposed to come at 6:40. She's running late. So.
I can only stay until 7:20 because I've got to go.
Okay. We'll make sure you get dinner.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I just meant, I'll stay.
Yeah.
Oh, we might as well talk while you're here. Okay. Okay. So. I was just going to share a little bit about food policy councils, what's happening in North Carolina, how we kind of talk about food councils. So how many of you are involved in a food council or something like a food council?
I guess I am.
Yeah, you already got that.
Great.
Robert, don't say you were.
So I know John's putting on the real press about this, but how many of you is food council or food policy council a very new concept or term? Great. Okay. So in North Carolina, we have about 35 food councils, local food councils, in some state of existence or emergence. I'm going to talk a little bit about what food councils are, but this is just kind of a quick overview. There are 100 counties in North Carolina, and most of our local food councils are county-based. And this is true because Community Food Strategies was funded to help support these groups coming into existence. So we've had a pretty quick proliferation of food policy councils, and I can talk about sort of why that was our strategy in North Carolina, but it's been a strategy for us for shifting towards the redesign of a local food system. This is one of the strategies that we're using as a state. And we can talk a little bit more about that, but let me just talk about how we talk about food councils so we have some context. So we talk about food councils as community organizations that help create the conditions needed to create more healthy food systems. So by create the conditions, we mean that often food councils aren't starting new programs or in charge of new programs or initiatives, but they might spark initiatives or help change the landscape in some sort of policy or systems way that allows groups to do work differently. And what's great about food councils is that they're really intentionally pulling together all these different perspectives. So that's the deal, right? Like we want people from very different viewpoints and realms to come together with a shared lens around food. And so that's sort of what this is showing. And who those people are is often representative of organizations and also businesses, but also very important to have a broad community voice. So it's not all, ideally, it's not all people who are representing organizations, but there are some people who are also representing just the wider community, people who eat and care about food. So these just list some folks that are often at the table, and then this image is what we use at Community Food Strategies to sort of think about, are we hitting all the sectors that we want to hit? And this is from the whole measures for community food systems, which is just a framework. And so these are, there's 6 of them, and I can always hit 5. Let's see if I can get all 6. Healthy people, vibrant farms and gardens, resilient ecosystems, so the environment, justice and fairness, so access, wage, economies, and strong communities, which we consider to be supportive policy. So we try to sort of think about all those different avenues and sectors and pull people from those different spaces. Oh, that's not up there.
I was going to ask you this.
Yeah.
Because I just almost like non-profit organizations and some food, like some food banks, and a lot of times they have healthy food, but do they have like the nutritional guidelines that go along to tell the people how healthy, you know, because they see certain stuff and like, I don't like that, you know how healthy it is. Because I know my mother died behind Alzheimer's disease, and it was like, in the beginning it was hard for me to change her diet because I had to recognize that she wasn't moving anymore to expand that, you know, that energy. You know, at first we would go on walks, and then she shut down when she went open her mouth and she didn't eat. But I would always have to, you know, like balance that act, you know, how much to feed her. And one of the things that I look at as you know, posted that up, it's like, you know, take as a food council person, you know, going to an Alzheimer's support group and like, okay, you know, your loved one is not going to be that mobile anymore. So you need to, you know, I don't know whether they have Alzheimer's diet or not, but I used to have to work with my mother, you know, on her weight, you know, as she would live with me, then she would live with my brother, then she would live with my sister. Oh, now I got to work the 20 pounds off her. Then I said, no, y'all starving my mother. You know what I mean? But you know, like, that's one of the problems that I face, and I seen where that could be a great help. You know?
Yeah, interesting. So what kinds of policies or initiatives could be in place to make sure that people have the information about what's nutritious? And also, you know, what are the connections in the network that can help you understand that? I think those are 2 avenues. There may be some policies or systems to put in place. There may also be this may be a network of people that can get you to that information.
Because my mother was like 59 when she had diagnosed with Alzheimer's. It was like, you know, she was still healthy, but mentally, you know, just, you don't want to walk them too many places because if they ever get out there,
Yeah.
they do the wrong deal.
Yeah, yeah, interesting.
I think it really highlights that, you know, one, everybody eats, and how we embrace shift as a culture and as communities, ways that support eating as, you know, healing and a positive part of a life. And I think also that those sorts of conversations are very important as we look as our nation is aging. Food for palliative care, I mean, those are all things that we tend to not think about because they're dark and unpleasant. But I think they're very crucial to conversations about broader food systems impacts and the people that sometimes don't get invited to the table to talk about things like food and what is nutritious and how do we link clinical knowledge with cultural norms and create an opportunity to bridge those places.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. And it's a great example of how lived experience and just relationship building can bring new perspectives to this work around food and food systems that open up these bigger questions about healthcare institutions and nursing homes and like what are those institutions doing around food and food systems, and so I think it's a really good point. Let's see. So this is a summary of kind of what food councils might do. So we talk about this as food councils are a group that assesses the current food system or food situation in a defined area. So for us, that's usually a county or a parish, but sometimes it's a region. We have a state food council in North Carolina, and so they would do that at the state level. So one, they're a group that is actively trying to understand the current food system and food landscape. And be experts on that, which is like this Food Fellows program is an awesome way to sort of move towards that. Two, they try to connect stakeholders, so that piece around networking and how do we build relationships and link folks to relationships. Educate leaders and the community about this sort of what you know and how it's affecting or impacting your community. And then four, recommend policy change. And the star beside policy is just our comment on what policy can or does mean, and that's a lot of different things, which we've already talked about. So that's a very distilled version, and it makes it look very clean, doesn't it? It's not that clean, but it is fun and can have a lot of impact. So what questions do you have? That's sort of my very short overview of what a food council is and what it does in the broad sense. I can talk more about that, but next we're going to kind of get into what are some of these food councils in North Carolina doing? What kinds of work are they moving into?
Because North Carolina is a smaller landmass than Louisiana, and I don't know how our central region compares. And I was wondering how that worked for y'all.
Yeah, that's a good question too, especially when we think about, you know, your focus is on county, but ours is on regional.
Mm-hmm.
I think yours is probably regional too. And so it might be an interesting conversation about that
Mm-hmm.
question and how they're related, right?
Right. Well, yeah, and I guess I wanted to know, but yours is a statewide, you know, but does it
Mm-hmm.
break down into regional stuff or?
Yeah, so region is so interesting because of the number of different stakeholders. So our economic development associations have different regions than our councils of government, than our Department of Health, than our extension, right? So like we don't have a set region. We as Community Food Strategies have broken the state up into 7 regions just generally by geography, and we let councils self-select. So some groups go to multiple of those regional meetings or gatherings or phone calls and some are very clearly in one. So I don't know if that's getting at your question, but we're also moving towards networking these councils by region. So offering both in-person and phone conversations for folks who want to be a part of it, to link and connect to counties in their region. So we want these groups to see one another as
Like they're not
support
doing
systems.
their own thing right here and nobody's talking over here.
Right, so it's both and. So they are doing their own thing by county, but they're also, we host events where we bring them all together and learn together, consider the landscape as a region. I mean, food systems are inherently regional. There's the southeast region of the United States, which is an important food systems region, right? So in that way, like, we are important partners in that regional landscape. And we can't redesign a food system if we're only working in an urban space, because there aren't enough farms to feed those people. And we can't only redesign a food system in a rural space because there aren't enough markets to support the farmers. So it has to be regional. We have found in North Carolina that it has been useful to start by county because it's an easy identifier for people, and it's an entry point that feels doable. Not that regions don't feel doable, and we have some, we have a regional council of government that wants to have a regional food council, and they want to host that and hold it. So that's great for us. We can work with them and sort of, so I don't know if I'm answering your question.
You are, and I mean, it was very, I guess I was just kind of asking, are there differences between your state and our state, and does it apply? Because we are kind of, I guess the region is different topographically. Yes, thank you. I can't get it out. Sorry.
Right.
But, and I guess that directs, what your mission is,
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess it's the same there, though. It's
Mhm.
every different region kind of directs their own little mission, and then it's a statewide.
That's right. So our work is in convening at all those levels. We try to get people together physically in person and also virtually as often as possible at multiple levels of scale. Does that make sense? And also, I would say there have been some challenges to organizing by county or parish. One of those is that, I don't know if this is a thing for you all, but food hubs, aggregators, have been like a really hot topic in North Carolina. And so every county or food council wants a food hub. And it's a terrible
It's not just Louisiana.
idea, right? You cannot have, what, say it again?
What is the food hub?
It's a place where farmers can bring what they grow and
Like a co-op?
kind of like a co-op, yeah.
That's what I gathered last week.
Yeah,
It's kind of
yeah.
like a co-op.
So you could grow tomatoes, and Robert could grow tomatoes, and Chris could grow tomatoes, and we could all bring our tomatoes to this central hub, and then they could be sold in greater numbers to another place or distributed to multiple different sales. So
Like the school system requires 20 boxes of tomatoes, and we can each only provide 7.
mhm,
Well, altogether they can buy our 20 boxes.
Okay.
yeah,
If we can bring it to a single place like a food hub and have it be aggregated and then sold as a unit.
yeah,
Based on their guidelines, they can only buy that certain amount, right?
right.
Such a good idea.
So food hubs provide a place to aggregate. They also provide storage, and they can also provide cold storage, which can extend the food that a farmer grows, which can be great. And some are providing freezer space, so if you can flash freeze. So it can be a great market driver for farmers. But if every county, every parish in your region has a food hub, it's not going to be as useful, right? Because none of them are going to be as impactful, and distribution, getting it out to places. Anyway, it's not a good idea to have a food hub in every county. And so that's been one problem with organizing by county, is that feasibility of good ideas often needs to happen at a regional scale in local food systems work. So there's that. That's happening. Hi.
Hi.
Great. What's your name?
Steve.
Hey, Stephen. I'm Abby. Good. Other questions? Is the food here?
It sure is.
Okay. So the next thing I have are some examples of what our councils are doing. So I just wonder if there are any other questions on kind of this topic and how councils are organizing or designing, or comments, or what you all are doing. Now is a good time for some of those.
Educate the leaders in the community, and this is maybe a question to you all. You know, when I lived in Texas, they had like certain churches, and I guess they used to get government surplus, and they would do a food distribution. Is there anything like that happening in this area?
It's a good question.
Yeah, they do that.
No, but yeah, there's even what's even cooler, like even taking the idea,
You're talking about like senior meals and.
No, they have like, they may have potatoes, corn, oranges, and they would just drop it at this church, and it would be, they put it in the newspaper, this church have like government surplus, or maybe, I think sometimes be surplus from farmers, and they just give it away.
yeah.
Food bank.
Yeah.
Well,
No, it's not a food bank, it just be centrally located around the city, and
in Texas, because the government is so long, the culture in Texas is that social and human services are not the purview of government at all. The faith-based communities have really established themselves as the human and social service providers, and have done really unusual systems development around that, and especially when it comes to the distribution of food. It's a lot more streamlined now in Texas, where most of them participate as food pantries in some sense, but sometimes in the more rural communities, it is really the system that you're describing, and so it's just a very unique, Texas is different.
But I also think churches are, the faith community needs to be at the table in these food council conversations. The relationships that exist there are powerful and can really leverage change in a lot of ways. And they have these great systems of connection. So we can learn a lot from the ways that the faith community has been organizing to get information and resources out to people for a long time, I think. So it's a really good point. It's a great example of something that, we could sort of shift a little bit around local foods instead of government food, and probably have a really innovative and useful idea.
They usually are some of the largest landowners in the community too. It's not currently being used for agriculture.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I know a lot of the churches that I work with over the years for various reasons, but they do lots of programs where they're faith-based, but they're also working with a government program to feed kids or elderly. Or,
Access to health care.
Right. And so
yep.
they do have a great social well-being network
Yeah.
already set up.
Yeah.
Maybe you're gonna touch on this later, but I'm curious specifically like how you initiate the councils when you go to a county you haven't been in before, like who you reach out to, and then is it strictly volunteer, the groups that you're setting up, or is there funding, or who gets paid, or how
Yeah.
does the funding
Yeah.
come?
Those are good questions.